get started, then we'll pass around the sign-in sheet. Make sure you guys sign in, and then we'll figure out how to enter your training. Some of this can be used for hazmat, JPRs, so hazmat awareness, and stuff like that also. But we'll figure out how to enter your target speakers so as long as your name on there. So I sat through this morning's class. It was very good. Does anybody remember taking the Be Nice course? Every fast. So I didn't realize until I talked to Dr. Pons that that grant that they were doing ran out like 10 years ago, because I had a bad frame of reference. So I don't think we've really addressed this stuff since then. So that's been like 10 years. And whether it's because of Trump and Rocket Man and even local domestic terrorism, the CDC has put out a statement that they recommend agencies be training on this type of stuff again. So I'm happy to have Dr. Pons here. He's semi-retired from Denver Health. Some of you may know him from there. But he's still out doing contract stuff, doing a lot of things with Stop the Bleed. Has anybody heard of that? Oh.
Didn't you have it?
Yeah, he was out there doing the wound packing stuff and tourniquets from the TCCC that was like the Stop the Bleed component. But that national initiative, he was very instrumental in that. So there's I could talk about all the great stuff he's done for about half an hour, but he'd get annoyed and you guys would get bored. So I'm going to just turn it over to him and let him go through this class. It was about 3.5 hours. I think we took one break, so it's a lot of information. The guys at the end of the class this morning, they were out there just talking like crazy because I think it's a lot of information, and we're gonna he's going to help us do some follow-up with some case studies so that after you have a chance to digest everything from today and go away for a day or two, then we'll readdress it and do some case studies where you can figure out some stuff. So with that, thanks again for being here.
Yep, sure. And yeah, we will cover a lot of material in a relatively short period of time. Feel free to ask questions as we go along. Everything you're going to see, frankly, we have stolen unabashedly from all of these various sources. I wish I could take credit for it, but I can't. We stole, as I said. Yes, the grant ran out 10 years ago, and we did update this, just so you know. So we're going to talk about biologic agents, radiologic agents, and chemical agents, okay? We're going to talk about the ways to appropriately recognize and respond to an incident involving one of these various agents, okay? Clearly, you as firefighters, you're frontline. You're going to be one of the first ones on that scene. You need to be able to identify that this is a potential threat agent, recognize the signs and symptoms of exposure, initiate the appropriate care, and obviously protect yourself in the process. It's really interesting with all of these agents, the reality is we tend not to kill that many people with exposure to them. But the effect is much like Sun Tzu said in his Art of War, kill one, you frighten 10,000. And that's pretty much what we end up doing with these agents and with terrorism is, you kill a couple people and then the impact on the rest of us is significant, as you all should be aware if you've ever gone through TSA at the airport. You know what it's like, okay? They have their objectives, and really I think that the psychological effect is perhaps one of the most prevalent in this, in that they really try to affect the society in which they are acting. Why the Be Nice agents? Well, number one is most of these agents are really easily available. A lot of them roll down our streets and railroads every day. They are easy to manufacture. You don't need to be very expert to make a lot of these. You honestly don't need a lot of this stuff if you pick a target appropriately. Small amount gets you a big bang in a relatively small place. Some of these incidents can be difficult to recognize, particularly radiologic and biologic. The effects are delayed, so the incidents can be tough to recognize initially. If you choose wisely, you can take a small amount of material, spread it over a large area, and get a very big impact. I think if you want to think like a terrorist for a second, if I was a terrorist, I would do something like take a little bit of anthrax, don't need a lot, throw it into the train down at DIA, okay? That train, as it goes by, it's pushing a column of air in front of it. We'll disperse that over essentially 1.5 miles of track. And then how many people every day will get exposed until it gets recognized? Okay, great way to go. The psychological impact, as I said, is big. And then, depending on the agent and the effect it has, it's going to overwhelm all of the available resources. Yours, ours in the hospital. It'll keep us all busy for a while. There are some limitations to these agents. You got to disseminate it effectively, and doing that can be difficult if you don't have a good dispersal mechanism. Many of these are delayed, and that tends not to get big-time news coverage. When you set off your bomb or you have a chemical agent that gets a lot of casualties, that gets you a lot of news coverage. Biologic agent or radiologic agent, they unfold over time. You don't get a big effect from that. People get mad at you when you disperse this stuff. They send the military after you. So it's counterproductive to the terrorist support. And obviously, if you don't use it properly, you may infect yourself. This graph is a two-part graph. The left-hand side, the vertical axis, is the potential impact of one of these events. The horizontal axis is the likelihood it would happen. So if you look at the top left, nuclear weapon, okay? Well, obviously, from a likelihood perspective, very low down on the list. But the impact is potentially huge, okay? If we look at the other side of that graph, however, biologic and chemical, okay, likelihood much higher, easy to make, readily available, cheap, okay? And the impact of both of those can be quite significant. So we need to be prepared. And then in terms of the time frame of the impact, as I said, explosives, incendiaries, chemical, that's immediate. You set it off, your effect is right then and there, okay? On the other hand, biologics and radiologics, they have an incubation period. It takes time for them to work their effects. So it's days to hours after the exposure that people get sick, okay? And we think of terrorism as something new? Afraid not. It's been around a long time, okay? All of these that you see on this slide, these are all predate September 11th, okay? And you see, even as far back as 1972, there was an attempt to release typhoid into the drinking water outside of the Chicago area. The 1984 Salmonella incident, that actually was an incident that occurred. A cult up in the Pacific Northwest released salmonella over the salad bar of a restaurant. Think about that the next time you have salad, okay? And they actually ended up hospitalizing 200 people who got infected with salmonella. And we have lots of other potential incidents as well, okay? This is terrorism worldwide. And you can see that while we talk about the big stuff, chemicals, radiation, biologics, okay, bombings and explosions, still the favorite. So that is clearly the big one. Now, we've been fortunate in this country. We haven't seen much of that yet, but it's something that we also should be prepared for. And I know you guys have already had a presentation on explosions and bombings. If you look at targets, Okay. The number one target is the average run-of-the-mill citizen. Military, police, and government representatives close thereafter. Okay. Well, hate to tell you, but you are government representatives. So, you do represent a potential target as well. If we look at the timeline of U.S. terror attacks since September 11th, and this is the U.S., okay, red is attacks that actually happened. The dark colored lines are ones that were discovered prior to the actual attack occurring. And you can see that, it's continuous, it's nonstop. And if you look at the trend, if you were to draw a line across it, what's the trend? The trend is upward. It's an increasing number over time. Okay, so this is something we're gonna face. We're gonna have to see. Okay, and this is deaths in the U.S. versus attacks. The solid line on this graph is the number of attacks that have occurred over the U.S. from 1970 until 2 years ago. The blue bars are the deaths associated with it. Of course, the really tall one is the September 11th attack. The second tallest one there is the first World Trade Center bombing in New York as well. Here's WMD incidents. And the prior graph was all terrorist attacks. This is WMD incidents, actual use of agents, biologic, chemical, radiologic. And again, the numbers are old, but you can see that, they're not zero. This stuff is out there.